Hey, this is Kylon Gienger, the creator and host of the Successful Dropout Podcast at successfuldropout.com. You are listening to the College Dropout Podcast.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me today on the College Dropout Podcast. I am your host, Sierra, and I once again thank you for joining me, you guys, today on the College Dropout Podcast, where we inspire, we empower, and we mentor individuals who dropped out of college or you skipped college, but now you want to become an entrepreneur. Guys, today is Tuesday, and we finally have a brand new interview for you. I got a chance to speak with someone who I actually now consider a partner in this college dropout sector, a wonderful dropout entrepreneur and just wonderful human being named Kylon. Kylon dropped out of college during his freshman year. Since then, he has founded and co-founded like multiple companies in the construction industry, the fitness industry, food service. He's even dabbled in online education industries. One of Kylon's passions is building great businesses and helping other people do the same. So guys, I don't want to take up too much time today. I know you've been eager to hear another interview with another successful college dropout. So I just want you guys to grab your pens, grab your pads, grab your iPhone. It's been so long since you had a chance to hear me say that. And let's go ahead and take some notes and listen to Kylon and how he went from dropping out of college to then becoming a youth pastor and now a serial entrepreneur. Thank you for joining me today, Kylon, who is the host of the Successful Dropout Podcast. Once again, thank you for finally joining me on the show. How are you today?
Doing good, Sierra. How about yourself?
I'm doing awesome. I'm very excited to talk to you and get to hear your full dropout story in terms of how you either skipped or dropped out of college. So let's go ahead and start with that. Did you skip or did you drop out of college, Kylon?
Totally just dropped out. Just one day decided to leave, and that was it. And kind of the full story there is I was right out of high school, started taking college classes at our local community college because, you know, that's what you're supposed to do. I hadn't put in a ton of thought into what I wanted, to do yet. Started taking these classes. I took a marketing class, and the gal teaching the marketing class, I remember, she had zero actual marketing experience. And essentially all the class was just her reciting from the textbook and us doing homework as outlined by the textbook. And I'd done enough, entrepreneurial type things and been involved with enough stuff to realize like there's a lot more than this. And we're just learning the theory here. We're learning about marketing. We're not actually doing marketing. Mm-hmm. And this gal, I'm paying all this money for this gal who hasn't actually done it to teach me. And so, and I just did not like college in general. I didn't like the schedule. I've been homeschooled most of my life, so I'm already I wasn't very institutionalized, I guess you could say. So it was a pretty easy decision, and I remember just walking up to the admissions office one day and saying I wanted to drop all my classes. I remember they looked at me, like I was crazy. It was kind of it's still taboo today, but it was definitely more taboo then. And this was in, I think, 2009. 2009. And, dropped. And honestly, I never looked back. A lot of the people that I'll talk to, like that I have on my show and stuff, many say they struggled for the first, X amount of months or even years on, the fear of not making it outside of college and whether or not they needed to go back and finish that degree and stuff. For me, and I guess for me, it was just I knew that whatever I decided to do would work out, and it would be better than the college route.
Now, so did you always have that entrepreneurial spirit? Because I know for me, when I dropped out, I struggled as well, and I actually did try to go back a few times. But for you, did you always have that entrepreneurial spirit, and you knew that you were just going to make something happen no matter what it was?
Yeah, I mean, when I was 10, 11 years old, we lived up in the mountains, and that's actually where we're moving back to, kind of our dream location. So we're coming full circle there. But we lived in the mountains. Me and all my siblings were homeschooled. My dad worked from home, running his own company, so I was kind of exposed to entrepreneurship really early on. And I started a little company, a little business called Lakeside Services, because we lived by a lake. And there were a lot of we lived up there full time, but there was a lot of rental like cabins and kind of vacation homes, and the owners would rent them out, and then I would go in, I'd shovel snow, I'd clean it up after the renters left, or people just there for kind of some weekend fun. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of my first little business, Lakeside Services. So yeah, I was exposed to it and kind of dabbled in entrepreneurship leading up to that.
Okay. That's awesome that you started, you grew up in a home where entrepreneurship was basically the staple for everything. Quick question. So you dropped out. What did you do right after that? Did you go get a job, or did you immediately start working on your own ventures?
I actually went and got a job / started working on my own ventures. It's kind of a hybrid. What I did is I went and I became the youth pastor at my local church. And this was a church I'd been very involved with growing up, especially in kind of the youth, music program, kind of interning with the and anybody who's listening, if they're familiar with kind of church and youth groups and stuff. I was used to interning and working underneath our adult youth leaders and stuff. I was 19 at the time, and I remember I called my pastor. I knew our current youth leader had just left, and I talked to him about me stepping in and taking that position. And I basically pitched myself and sold myself to him. And he said, if you're really serious, we'll give you a shot. We'll let you, try it out for a few months while we're in between youth pastors here. And so I had that option, and then there was another option I was considering that I can't remember right now, but I eventually picked working at my church. So I became our church's youth pastor basically at 19 years old, and that gave me a decent salary to work from right away. And also it had a lot of entrepreneurial elements because whoever was there previously, there weren't a whole lot of systems involved. There wasn't a lot of structure. And the youth program, our pastor wanted it to grow. So that takes a lot of entrepreneurial skills. I had to jump in and figure out how do we make this thing grow. And I often tell people that working in ministry is a lot tougher than working in business because you're working with volunteers. You don't have kind of the carrot and stick of the salary, the paycheck, and getting fired that you do in a normal job. They're volunteers, and you've got to get them to show up on time and be passionate and put in the work. And I did something that was pretty innovative for, I guess, youth groups in general at the time. I made it a point to make every person in a leadership position, every person that did something in the youth group that helped it grow, they weren't an adult basically.
Oh, wow.
So we had these young, we started what we call connect groups, which was kind of just small groups that met every week in addition to the main gatherings. And all of our connect group leaders, is what we called them, were other teenagers, like really mature, like 18, 19-year-olds that were leading other youth. And so we had kind of adult supervisors and guides that would kind of oversee broad operations and be there for questions and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you'd show up to our youth group, and all the sound, all the music, all the, like, a lot of the sermons or lessons, all the leadership was handled by basically your peers. And that did wonders in getting people involved and growing the youth group, because we get kids come in, and not only would they kind of learn about learn what we had to teach, but they would want to get really involved, because here's a place where you're 18 years old, 16 years old, and you're given a decent amount of responsibility.
Right. That's awesome. That's very awesome that you became a youth leader at 19. So how long did you do that?
I did that for 2 years.
Okay. So 2 years as the youth pastor at your church, where you grew that, if I don't want to call it a company, but you grew that organization, if you will. You created leaders up under that structure. And then what did you do after that?
After that, I got married, actually, and the whole process of dating and getting engaged, and then eventually, a couple weeks before our wedding, caused me to just realize like that there were some other things that I wanted to do. And I'd been involved in ministry for just, the past 2 years, very heavily as the youth pastor. But then for the majority of my life, been pretty heavily involved in our church and ministry in general, around our area. So I decided to kind of step away from all that for a bit and just basically try other things, see other, parts of the world, and just be married as well. Mm-hmm. So we ended up getting married 2 weeks before we got married. We didn't have a place to live, and I didn't have a job. And we had I think a little less than $1,000 in our bank accounts. And within those 2 weeks, we found a place to live. I found a job working at a construction company, and all was great. And so I worked at that construction company for a year and just learned, kind of apprenticed there, I guess you could say, learned some really valuable skills. And I guess that was it was a bit of a hiatus from the whole entrepreneurial route. And actually, while I was working in that construction company, was training to enlist in the Navy.
Wow.
And that's what I ended up doing next.
Okay. So what year did you start the Successful Dropout podcast, and what brought you to wanting to create a show like that?
I started that I think about nine months ago or so. Well, it was June 2016. End of June 2016 was the first episode. And what brought about that idea is, the actual story is we were sitting in our kitchen at our kitchen table, and I was helping my sister brainstorm names for her podcast, which shout out to Kylon Gienger, Entrepreneur Before 25 podcast. But we were brainstorming names, and I threw out the name Successful Dropout, mm-hmm. and she didn't like it, but it stuck with me, and I thought about it, and it was one of those things where. It's one of those cliche stories where the name just pops into your mind, and then all of a sudden, this whole vision kind of floods into your head. And that's what it was like for me. Just the name Successful Dropout. And then I was like, I knew I wanted to start a podcast, and it was just like, I want to interview people that were successful without their college degree. And I jumped online really quick. I couldn't really find anybody that was much of an authority in that area, much less had episodes or podcasts or consistent content on the subject. Mm-hmm. And of course, it was close to my heart because I was a dropout, and I consider myself, success is relative, obviously, but I consider myself successful and on my way to being even more successful. That was about it. So I took action on that. It took me like a month to get the podcast up and running. And wow, just a phenomenal response. There's definitely an audience out there, as I'm sure you found, Sierra, who are, I guess, starving for this kind of content.
Absolutely.
And we are entering a very unique season in the higher education industry where we're kind of at this tipping point. And so information like this, people are actively looking for it. Mm-hmm. Dropping out of college it's at a really interesting spot where it's both at the same time taboo and kind of overly romanticized. Like people, it's kind of hush hush. People, oh, you're a dropout, and it's got this negative stigma to it. But at the same time, you've got people like Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs and these. Excuse me, my dog's making noise. I think my wife just put her out. But yeah, like the Mark Zuckerbergs and Steve Jobs, where it's kind of overly romanticized and like, drop out, start you have a $1 billion idea that you start from your dorm room and that sort of thing. And where I like to operate is that space right in between those two. It is something that should be talked about, that you shouldn't be ashamed of. It is a legitimate, amazing decision for somebody to make. And at the same time, you shouldn't expect to always drop out with that $1 billion idea, which is why the tagline that we have, drop out, grind, and succeed, is so important, because that grind is the central portion there. It's going to take a lot of hard work and honestly, blood, sweat, and tears.
Absolutely. And it's so funny when you said the title just popped into your head, because the same thing happened with me. I was originally looking to start a podcast, but my podcast at first was going to be about a journey of me quitting my day job, and I never created it. And then I don't know, when I got this idea, it was just like full force. But, as you stated, yours is based on successful dropouts, and mine is somewhat the same, except I kind of go for the ones who are already entrepreneurs, because there are a lot of successful dropouts who do still have a 9-to-5 or who do still work for corporate America. But like I said, I love it. I've been following your show, and I agree. We are both entering a space that I think people are craving for this information, because they know there's another way to do it, but they don't really know how to do it. And I got so tired of listening to the same entrepreneurship podcast, because I felt like I was listening to the same people. Everyone had the same story. And when you're a dropout, the story is just not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had some crazy stories on the podcast. And yeah, you're absolutely right. They typically take some wild turns, just because right off the bat, I mean, with entrepreneurship, you have the essence of entrepreneurship is solving problems, and right off the bat you've got risk, you've got sacrifice, and all this stuff, the highs, the lows. That makes for great stories. But with dropping out, it's kind of, and especially if you're dropping out to be an entrepreneur, it's kind of twofold. Not only are you dropping out from this really established track and system that society, the majority of society, says you have to do, but you're being an entrepreneur as well. And so you get some really interesting people, really great stories, and a lot of inspiration.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And since we're on the subject of entrepreneurship now, let's talk about some of your entrepreneurship ventures currently. What are you currently working on besides the podcast?
So I'll take you guys back to, I was working construction. I enlisted in the Navy. After the Navy is when I got out. I was stationed in Florida. We moved back to Washington State, and I decided I wanted to kind of pick up the entrepreneurial track again, rather than, go work a 9-to-5 job. And I'd already applied to a couple different jobs and gotten a couple interviews set up. And I figured I would just work something to pay the bills until I came up with the next idea and pursued that. Well, my buddy called me up while we were in the process of moving, and he said, "I want to start a painting company. Are you in? I need $1,000 to buy a van." And this is a guy we grew up together. I was best friends with his brother at the time, and really with his entire family. So we kind of knew and trusted each other. And I said, sure. I gave him $1,000, which was like half of what I had in savings at that time. And he bought a van and got our first job. And by the time I moved back to Washington, I was able to jump on one of those first jobs. And so that company was turned into a residential commercial painting company. And we specialized in large out-of-state jobs. So we would go, like, for instance, we went and lived in Dallas, Texas for 3 months and painted several different apartment complexes down there. We've worked in Georgia and Indiana and Iowa. The company grew into the high six figures with multiple employees in the first 3 years. At one time, we worked with a lot of subcontractors. And I think at our max, we had like somewhere between 20 and 30 subs and employees who would manage them, working in other states and stuff. And so we got a pretty large operation going. And I just sold my half of the business to him a little over a year ago. So the business is still going, but I'm kind of out of that game now. In the process of building that business over a few years, though, we started 2 other businesses, local brick and mortar businesses. The first one was a hot yoga studio, Renew Hot Yoga. And then a juice bar, actually. And it is still the only juice bar in our city here. We're in Yakima here in Central Washington.
Wow.
And so we kind of used the painting company to help support both financially and then with the purchasing and rehabbing of the building we eventually built those businesses into. So we kind of used one company to support the other. And so now I'm out of the painting company, but I still own, my wife and I still own the hot yoga studio and the juice bar with my partner, the guy I started the painting company with, and his wife. And so that's kind of what we've got going on currently.
That's awesome. So have you entered into the online business space yet, or are you still just working on the content that you're creating with the podcast?
The podcast is really my first successful foray into online business. Mm-hmm. I have kind of a failure story. It was right at the beginning of 2016. I sold my portion of the company to my business partner, basically used the proceeds to live off of throughout the year of 2016, and the goal was to build an online business. We built 3 service-based brick and mortar businesses, and I was really interested in the online direction, the scalability of it, the mobility of it. And so I started a website called systemsforsuccess.com, and it's still alive, and you can go check it out. Okay. And it was an online course, a series of online courses for small business owners on how to design systems into their business so their business works harder for them and they don't have to work as hard inside their business. And this was all based off of the company actually that my dad built and ran while we were homeschooled in the mountains. It was a big business coaching company, and he created this massive curriculum that just helped business owners basically design systems into their business. But it had been dormant for like 20 years. This was back in the 90s. And so I kind of resurrected it. We revamped a lot of the stuff, reshot videos. I basically disappeared for 4 months into a home office and built this shiny new thing that I thought people would want and love, you know. And come to find out, we launched to crickets, basically. And that was kind of my first lesson in basically don't lock yourself up in a room and build this shiny thing just because you think people want it, you know. And what I discovered about that was people still wanted the content. In fact, we just finished teaching a 3-year-long class, my dad did, with local business owners here on the exact same content. So people wanted it. The difference is they didn't want how it was packaged. I built it this. I thought like people would just by themselves, you know, autonomously just buy the course, work through it by themselves. It's a really massive course. It goes really in depth, and that they would apply these principles to their businesses by themselves. And I would just sit back and make the money, right? You know, that's the perfect scenario. But, you know, people wanted coaching with this. It really takes a lot of one-on-one meeting them where they're at. And so that I guess was my first foray into online business, and I learned a lot from that. And so the second time around with Successful Dropout, really just been focused on providing a lot of free, valuable content. And then I'm just now starting to, you know, the audience is to a certain number where I'm able to really get some good feedback and interact with them and ask them what they want and what their pain points are and problems are. So then I can build a product or a service that will solve that. And so that's what we're currently working on. And so I guess the lesson to learn there is when you're building a new business, a new product or service, as soon as you can, talk to your customer, ask what they want, you know, provide enough free value to them to where they follow you and care enough about you and what you're doing to where they'll give you feedback on what additional problems they want to solve. Then solve those problems. And by the time you've solved that problem in the form of a product or a service and you go to sell it to them, you're basically selling them exactly what they asked for.
Exactly.
And so the sale's easy at that point. And so that was the big lesson learned there.
So let me ask you something. You've done a lot of different type of businesses. You just said brick and mortar. You tried your hand at the online course. You were a youth pastor. Like, how do you stay motivated?
That's a fantastic question, and something that I had struggled with for a long time. And I guess as far as how I stay motivated, that's a good question. I guess it's just because I know, as morbid as this sounds, it's because I know I'm going to die. I have an app on my phone that tells me, and I put it in place of, and again, sorry if this is morbid, but no, go ahead. I put it in place of where my email app used to be on my phone, down there on the front dashboard that's always up no matter what screen you swipe to, and it's an app called Life Count, and it basically tells me how many more days I have left to live based on, the approximate age that I typed in, I want to live this long. And it's the fact that I know I'm going to die. I know that I want to leave like a legacy and leave the world better than I found it. And that time is so precious. That's, I guess, what keeps me motivated in general, motivated to build things and to grind and to stay up, all night working on something so it can launch the next day, but also motivated to create some sort of work-life balance and like spend time with my wife and my friends and live in the moment and stuff. And there's a video. There's a video. It's Gary Vaynerchuk. If anybody follows him, I'm not his biggest fan, but I do like a lot of the stuff he puts out. He put out a video, and it's just a quick. He's like sitting in a limousine, and some gal taps on the window, and he rolls it down, and she says like, "Motivate me" or something like that. And he's like, "You're gonna die." And that was it. And he rolls the window up and drives off. And I was like, it's just brilliant, because at the end of the day, we all die. And it would be a really sucky thing to just die and have everybody forget you and not leave any kind of legacy, right. And you don't have to be like Steve Jobs. You don't have to make a dent in the universe, but even just to your friends and family, even just and maybe you're not even written into the history books, but if somebody really studied your life, what's the ripple effect that you had? Who did you influence? And because you influenced them, did they go do something else? And at the end of the day, I love being able to sit back and see, like, just in our brick and mortar businesses, we serve thousands of people every year. And it's little things like somebody comes in and buys a juice, and our tagline is make healthy easy. We make it really easy for people to live a healthy lifestyle with that and the yoga. And just it's a small thing in the grand spectrum of their lives, of our customers' lives, but it makes a big difference to me knowing that I built something and I'm a part of something that makes that kind of impact.
I absolutely agree. And it's funny you mentioned the Gary V video. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Eric Thomas. They call him E.T. the hip hop preacher. He has a video called I Made My Mark, where he talks about that. Like, when you die, what are people going to say about you? Like, what are you leaving behind? And he says the same thing. Like, you don't have to be Steve Jobs, but if you impact your family, your community, your peers, that's leaving a mark. And everybody doesn't operate on a daily basis with that in mind. So that's very important, very important. Yeah, and the other thing too that I feel, I don't know if you were trying to get at this with the question. Either way, I think it's valuable. I have done a lot of stuff. I mean, just in the past 3 years, I've been involved with and built businesses in like 4 or 5 different industries, and I've been in ministry, I've been in construction, I've been in the military, and just done all this stuff. And then there's people that do like one thing for 10 years, or they're interested in one subject or one industry, and they build businesses and products or services or work jobs in that specific industry for 5-10 years. And until recently, it was really a struggle for me to not get down on myself, because if a random person who doesn't really know me looks at my life, they might think that I don't stick with things very often. Mm-hmm.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I'm jumping around to all these
mean.
different careers, and what would happen if you just devoted 10 years to something? You know, maybe you'd be a billionaire by now, or you'd have a world-renowned company. And I just want to speak to anybody else who's out there who maybe relates to this, that it's always been really difficult for me to just find one thing that I want to devote like my entire life to, like one life purpose. Something I've discovered recently is I don't think that everybody has just one life purpose, or is meant to just be devoted to one thing for their entire lives. You know, life, there's seasons in life, and that's okay. Is what I'm trying to say. I hope that makes some sense, but it was something that I struggled with for a while, and I'm just starting to come to terms with it. And on the flip side of that, focus is so key. You know, the follow one course until success is the acronym there. And what really matters is how you define that success. I mean, do you want to build a 7-figure company? That might take 10 years of focus on a particular subject or company or industry. Or do you just want to gain enough experience to start another kind of company, you know, which is more where I was. I'm not super passionate about painting, but it was one of the largest. Whereas my partner, he truly is. Like, when it comes to painting, like, there's nothing he would rather do some days than like paint a clean wall, you know. And I'm just not. That the 3 years I was involved from almost day one, it was about gaining experience for the next thing, because we grew fast. It taught me how to deal with employees and customers and sell myself and sell our service. And that to me was a stepping stone to the next thing. So hope that it, you know, makes sense and encourages somebody out there.
Absolutely. It's so funny because this whole subject of one thing and focusing on one thing has been very popular lately. You know, I forget the guy's name who wrote the book, and the book is sitting right here in front of me. I actually read the book, The One Thing, and when you read it and you hear the concept, it does sound great. But when you have a mind, which I'm going to say like you and I, your mind just doesn't work that way. You have so many ideas, and you believe in yourself enough that you have the ability to make them all come true. So it's more so about figuring out which one to focus on at this time and when it's time to let it go and go to the next one.
Yeah, and I would say with that, I think it's a valid concept. I think whenever you can, you should just focus on the one thing. But all I'm saying is that it doesn't have to be the thing you do for the next 10 years.
Right.
But man, trying to multitask and take on multiple projects. I mean, we were building the yoga studio and doing some pretty big projects with the painting company all at the same time. And that's a whole another set of stories, but we almost went bankrupt, and it was just, and there were 4 of us involved with that, both my partner and I and our wives. And it was still like so overwhelming, and we got it done. And now we have 2 great businesses as a result. But man, whenever you can, focus on just that one thing for whatever season you've decided it's going to be, you know, whatever, focus on one thing until success. You know, what does that success look like? Is it something that's probably going to happen 10 years from now, like a $1 billion valuation on a company or a multi-million-dollar exit? Or is it just growing it to maybe 5 employees and gaining a certain amount of experience before you move on to the next thing? So
absolutely. And the subject of what success looks like to you was very important, because it's different for everyone. Like you said, is it the $1 billion IPO maybe, or is it 5 employees and then it's time to go? Yeah.
And, you know, I've been reading this book, if you're familiar with James Altucher at all. He's got a book called, he's a great guy. He's got a book called that he just came out with. His first one was Choose Yourself, I think, just Choose Yourself. And this one is Choose Yourself Guide to Wealth. And in there, he talks constantly about the importance of ideas. And so he personally writes down 10 ideas a day about anything. They could be ideas for new businesses he wants to start. They could be ideas on how Google could be better. And he'll send those ideas to Google. He'll act on those ideas to himself. And now he's become, LinkedIn called him in to just come up with new ideas and help him brainstorm on new things. He's the idea guy, and he knows he turns these ideas into money, is essentially. And he's got lots of different stories. But his point is that ideas, where we're at now with the way technology is, the economy is, where we're at in the entrepreneurial landscape, is that ideas, he argues, are the currency of the future, are the currency moving forward. Great ideas. And he talks about, how many businesses fail, the failure rate of new businesses, the failure rate of new ideas is just staggering. For every 10 businesses you start, one or two of them might actually work out and become really long-lasting, profitable businesses. And so he actually talks about executing on as many ideas as you can. And so it's been a really interesting concept for me to learn, to just be really active and get good at coming up with ideas and then executing on them as fast as possible, and basically trying to break them as soon as possible, trying to break a new business into the ground as soon as possible. I've got one I'm working on now, and I've kind of given myself a timeline of a month, and I've got action steps that I'm going to take to see if it's actually going to be of value to people and if it's actually going to work out within that month. And they're really drastic stuff. Like, I'm going to try to get my first customer. I'm going to try to get them to pay me like within that month, and I'm trying to get feedback from them, instead of I could spend, like I did last year, the entire month building the thing and building the website on all the systems. Instead, I'm just going to build the very bare bones, and I'm going to do the work myself instead of outsourcing it to just a few customers if I can get them, and get that fee, and basically try to see if I can bankrupt the business and I guess run it to death like as fast as possible. Because if it's a bad idea, I want to know sooner, right?
Right.
Rather than
later.
Phil Knight, who's the founder of Nike, there's a great book, Shoe Dog, about kind of his journey and with Nike. In the beginning of the book, he talks a lot about how he was just trying to break the business and fail fast.
Wow.
In the beginning, because if it wasn't going to work out, he didn't want to spend time on a bad idea. And so just really something to consider when you're pursuing new ideas.
That's very eye-opening. I've never heard that concept, but the more I sit here and think about it, it makes sense. And you can relate that to any type of business or any type of idea or venture you want to start. Like, just do it quick so you know if it works, and then you can move on if it doesn't.
Yeah, why spend a month or 3 months and several $1,000s building a website and coming up with the perfect logo and stuff? Like, find out if people actually want to buy it from you.
Right.
Try to fail with the business as fast as possible. Because, I know there's some optimists out there that think that, even if it's a mediocre idea, if you're an amazing entrepreneur, like, you can make it work. And I just don't believe that. I think there's good ideas, and then there's just bad ideas. And you won't know if there's a bad idea until you try to find out if it's a bad idea as fast as possible. Why would you want to spend a year on a bad idea when you could only spend a month and move on to the next idea, which could be the one that takes off?
Absolutely. Well, that's some good stuff there. The next question, and it's actually something that I asked all of my guests, is as we're closing the interview, could you just leave us with a quote or an affirmation that you turn to whenever you may get frustrated?
I can. Let me pull it up here really quick just to make sure that I've got the right one. But this is a quote from Tony Robbins, and it's just been constantly in my mind since the beginning of the year, and it's helped me numerous of times just get my mind back in the right place.
Okay.
He says, "Life is always happening for us, not to us. It's our job to find out where the benefit is. If we do, life is magnificent." And so that's a quote that I'll leave you guys with. If you can internalize that as just a core belief of yours, that life is always happening for you instead of to you. It's the opposite of a victim mentality. It's an extreme ownership mentality. You are responsible for your life. And a lot of the things that have happened to you, whether good or bad, you can trace back to decisions you've made.
Absolutely.
And so at any given point in time, it's up to you to either decide that life is happening to you and there's nothing you can do about it, and you get complacent or anxious or depressed, or you can decide that life is happening for you and you can find the positive in things, figure out how to turn it around into your favor and effectively choose yourself. So,
and guys, that was Kylon Gienger. Once again, he left you with a powerful quote from Tony Robbins that said, once you realize that life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. You should be able to change your mindset, change what you have going on, and ultimately change your life. Like I said, guys, today's interview with Kylon was one very different from the normal conversations I have with people. I think one of the things that I took out of it for me, the biggest nugget, if you will, that I took out of it is that, you have an idea, jump into the idea, figure out if it's going to work, fail fast. That way, if it doesn't work, you haven't wasted a whole bunch of time and a whole bunch of money. And that's something that I'm working on figuring out. It's something that I've often asked myself, like, okay, when is it time to actually move on from a project? When is it time to move on from a business venture? Like, how do you know when it's time to pull back and get into something else? I think most of us are attempting to become serial entrepreneurs or just an entrepreneur, period. But sometimes you have different ventures going on and you don't really know which one you should pull back from and which one you should keep going with. Some people have the idea and the notion of just stick with it 8, 10, 15 years, and eventually the seed will grow. Some people have a totally different thought process when it comes to starting a new project, starting a new business, and figuring out, when do I keep going and when do I, pull back and try something else. So guys, I would love some feedback if you could let me know how you feel about that, your experiences with that. Also, like always, guys, could you please leave me a rating and review via iTunes? You can go to my website, thecollegedropoutpodcast.com. There's an icon for iTunes there. You can go there, leave a 5-star review, hopefully. If not, whatever you feel is sufficient. Also, like always, audible.com is still sponsoring the podcast. If you go to www.audibletrial.com/the College Dropout Podcast, you'll have an opportunity to try out their service free for 30 days. During that 30 days, you get to download one free audiobook that you get to keep regardless if you continue the service with them or not. So guys, I thank you so much for your patience. I thank you so much for your loyalty. And I thank you so much for continuing to reach out to me and ask me what's going on. When are we going to get a new interview? We need the information. I really, really appreciate the support. I'm back on track, everybody. I promise I'm never, ever going to fall off the wagon again. I just want to thank you once again for the support, for the kind words, the emails, the DMs. And like always, guys, make today a great day. Make it a great week. And remember, always be impactful and be intentional.